All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Thank you for watching and listening to the Adult in the Room podcast. I'm Victoria Taft. And please, right now, hit the subscribe button on Spotify, YouTube, and Rumble. And please save our settings for your future listening and watching enjoyment. And leave a great review on Apple Podcasts. I appreciate that. Okay, now on to the show. Daniel Turner is the founder and the executive director of Power the Future.
Yeah.
And I've got much more by way of an introduction coming up in a little bit, but I just want to thank you right now for coming on the Adult in the Room podcast.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Well, you're a person with myriad experience and interesting background. And how did you get so tuned in? You're younger than I am. So how'd you get tuned into politics? Why has this been your raison d'etre?
We were born into a politically interested family. So my dad loved politics. So I do remember being even a little kid. I joke that my first real political memory was knocking on doors in '84 for Reagan's reelection, because Dad said Reagan's going to win New York, and we're going to go do lit drops. And I was 8, 9. So I don't have a huge memory of it, but I've been paying attention to this stuff for a while. Was always in this space and have been for a solid 20 some odd years. But just in the last couple, where I was engaged in energy issues from a large macro perspective. And I saw this real attack from the environmental left towards the energy community, towards energy workers. Really, it started with coal. It started with coal of the Obama administration. And I watched it from an outside perspective. I didn't start the organization until I actually went into former coal towns and energy towns. And I realized we have a huge problem in America. Our energy is made in rural America. And I'm in a sheep farm in rural Virginia right now. So I consider myself a rural American. I consider myself a farmer. I am. Our energy comes from rural communities, right? Coal, oil, gas, fracking pipeline. It's found in rural America, or those people live and breathe in rural America. But energy policy is made by urbanites. And there's nothing wrong with being an urbanite, right? I'm originally from New York City. But they make energy policy, and they have no connection with the men and women whose lives they affect. So they will say, we're going to shut down the Keystone Pipeline. And you say, well, that's 11,000 people who now lost their job. And John Kerry will tell you, no, we gave them the choice to choose a better profession. That was the day of the inauguration. We give them the choice.
Learn a code.
Yeah, remember that?
I do.
And so I saw this huge disconnect and thought, these folks in rural America who produce our energy don't really have a voice. Sometimes even their own members of Congress have great shame that they represent energy workers. And so they talk about renewables and wind and solar. And so I got tired of being on the outside and seeing the destruction of rural communities, energy communities, and driving them into poverty. I'm very close to the West Virginia border. I spend a lot of time in Appalachia. We were talking offline about J.D. Vance. Hillbilly Elegy was very instrumental as I was building this organization. I read that book, right? I've seen these communities and lived near these communities, and I felt like I had enough being on the sideline or just being a consultant. I had to go all in on trying to represent them in a pugnacious way, because their lives are being destroyed. And yes, energy, we can talk about the economy and national security and war in Russia and OPEC and all that. But I started it because of coal towns in West Virginia. Yeah. And people like John Kerry and Michael Bloomberg said, sorry, go find something else to do. And that bothered me so much I had to do something. And here we are.
Well, and let me tell you, there's an analog on the other side of the United States, on the West Coast, from Humboldt County to the Oregon, deep forests of Oregon to Washington State in the timber industry. And there was an update on a story I wanted to actually talk with you about today. And it was a story I had updated I do a West Coast, Mest Coast column for PJ Media. And it was about the spotted owl, northern spotted owl. You know about this northern spotted owl. Okay, well, so the spotted owl has been in the news and rinse, repeat, recycle this horrible, thing happening to this owl in the forests of the Pacific Northwest specifically, but also along the West Coast, Mest Coast. And this devastated the timber industry. The fact that these tree sitters and tree spikers and all sorts of things, these people went into the forests and they made up stories about how the spotted owl could only exist in old growth forests. They would never, absolutely never think about putting its nest in a new tree. We couldn't possibly have that. And by the way, people said at the time, hey, wait a second, not the environmentalists. They said, what's causing the problems with the spotted owl isn't the fact that we're cutting down old growth forests. Trees do grow back, and I do appreciate and revere old growth forests. Don't get me wrong. Fact of the matter is, though, barred owls were killing the northern spotted owl. And yet that never seemed to hit home with the people making the decisions, where they said, we can't let logging roads be built into these forests, and we cannot salvage log in these forests. We cannot even manage forests on federal and state lands because everybody mirrors the stupidity of the feds. We can't do any of that because that would be bad for the spotted owl and or the whatever other attendant things that they say they need to protect. And that destroyed, I should say more accurately, decimated the Oregon timber industry. I was doing talk shows there as well on the radio. And now those people who were doing loggers, third, fourth generation loggers, they're getting welfare from the feds because they're getting replacement monies for the fact that the federal government destroyed their lives. And now, you know what we have? Here's what we have. First of all, lies. Second of all, we have the spotted owl still endangered. Well, what have you been doing about it? Oh, you've been doing everything wrong about it. And then third, now we have 3 seasons on the West Coast, Mest Coast, and it boils down to something like this. We have the rainy season, we have the construction season, and we have wildfire season because they won't manage the forests. Please, I know you know about this. Please talk more about it.
Yeah, it's such a great parallel because the spotted owl, that was huge in the Clinton administration. We don't use any less wood. Now we just buy a lot of it from Canada and we buy it from overseas. And you say, well, we haven't really done anything to protect old growth or, I talked to the governor of Alaska once and he was saying how Rhode Island's timber industry is more lucrative than Alaska's because they're not allowed to do timber. Exactly. They're not allowed to do any mining, any harvesting of timber in Alaska and logging in Alaska, because of just policies made by people in Washington, D.C. And I go to Alaska quite a bit for my job. People don't realize how big Alaska is. I tell people when I go to Anchorage and I have to fly up to the North Slope where the oil and gas is found, it's the equivalent of going from New York to Miami. I mean, it's a big state. It's a really big state. And yet you can't harvest, you can't do logging in Alaska because of bad policy. And so you take this with coal issues is where I started, but we talk about all fossil fuels. Same idea, right? We're not using any less coal. Barack Obama said when he was running for president in 2007, when he was still candidate Obama, on the stump, on the campaign trail, and he said, I'm not going to make coal illegal, but I'll tell you this, if I'm elected president and you own a coal mine, you're going to go bankrupt. And people applauded and said, this is great. Well,
that was an editorial meeting with the San Francisco Chronicle, I think it was.
And that
tape got out.
Yep. We don't use less coal. We pay 3 times more for it because we have fewer coal mines. That's absolutely true. But the price of coal has just gone through the roof. Why? Because the demand has stayed the same. the supply has greatly diminished. So how are we benefiting from this, right? I joke all the time on coal issues. You've got two secretaries in the Biden administration. You've got the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, who opposes all coal, all mining, all fossil fuels, wants it all eradicated. And all she has done through her policies is we've seen gas, oil prices steady at $82, $83 a barrel, a good $40 above their historic averages, almost twice. Right? So coal prices high, oil prices high. That's Deb Haaland. We've got Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who says we're going to build roads and bridges all around the country to rebuild this infrastructure project. But he knows that you can't make cement or steel or any of these projects without oil and coal and natural gas. And I wonder, do they ever talk? Right? Does Pete Buttigieg ever go to Deb Haaland and say, like, you're making it so expensive to get coal, you can't make steel without, you can't make cement without coal. Joe Biden would go and talk about, we're going to build this bridge and I'm here with the Iron Workers Union. Where do you think iron comes from? Right? Does it grow from the ground? If it did, they wouldn't harvest it anyway. But you can't make any of these projects without coal. So why are you making coal? You can't make solar panels without coal. I mean, it's one of my biggest jokes when I do presentations at Q&A. You know, you say it's not green to burn coal to make electricity, but it's green to make coal, to make solar panels, to make electricity intermittently and for twice the price. How is that green, right? Like, why are we allowed to burn coal to make solar panels, but you can't burn coal to make electricity? No one has an answer for that. And if you do, they say climate change. You said, but you're not solving the problem. We're not burning fewer. We're just importing them from foreign countries, or we're charging more. So what's the goal here? And you said earlier, right, the commies. That's the goal. I mean, this is just pure communist. This is just pure Marxist ideology run rampant. The spotted owls were a great example of that. Wasn't about the owls. It was about control, and it was about freedom and property rights and private industry and destroying livelihoods, because that's what the left does. They destroy.
Literally, I mean, the forests of the Pacific Northwest, 1 million acre feet of timber go up in flames every year. And they talk about, boy, we want to save the environment. We have global warming. Do you realize, I mean, I think a lot of people don't understand that carbon is stored in trees. Trees are literally a sink for all kinds of pollutants in the air, i.e. CO2, if that really is a pollutant, which it's not. So these things are emitted. They don't manage the forest. The forests go up in flames. I'm not saying that it doesn't anyway in some respects. I mean, lightning strikes happen, but when you don't clean out the forests, you don't manage the forests, if you don't get out invasive species of trees that go up in flames like that among the evergreens and stuff, you are asking to have a destructive fire. And what happens is that sink of carbon goes right up into the air. And if they continue with their stupidity and say that CO2 is the driver of global warming, then they should probably try to stop forest fires, but they don't.
Yeah, exactly. And then how do they measure the severity of these forests? As they measure it in dollars. Or these forest fires, they measure it in dollars. And you say, well, yeah, like this forest used to be logging. You don't log anymore, but you do allow people to build $25 million homes. And so now the forests aren't managed properly, and it's scattered with these mega mansions all throughout. What happens when they go up? And they say, well, look at the cost of this storm. Similarly, we do this in hurricane season every year. They say the cost of hurricanes keep going up. 400,000 people have moved to Florida in the last couple of years. They all have, $1,000 phones. They all have flat screens. They have 3 SUVs. The same hurricanes have been coming through for millions of years, but now there are 400,000 more people with millions of dollars more goods. And they say the price of these storms keeps going up. It must be climate change. Well, no. Same with tornadoes. The same tornado alley, but for 70,000 years, there was nothing there. Now we've got mega mansions and the plains, and the tornado's like, well, I'm sorry you built a house there, but I've been doing this for millions of years. So I think my point is nature is brutal, right? Like nature is fire. Nature is hurricanes. Nature is storms and tornadoes and hail. It's fossil fuels and human ingenuity that allows us to coexist with nature and actually kind of contain nature. Forests are going to burn unless humans are allowed to develop the forests, enter the forest. Exactly. Put burn roads, etc. That's not disrespecting the forest. That's living in harmony with nature, which is a brutal, brutal, brutal entity and will always win. So people have this idea that like if we just left nature alone, there'd be peace. No, if we left nature alone, there'll be destruction because nature is vicious.
That's an excellent point. It brings me right into the Michael Crichton State of Fear quote that he's got, and that he put in that a wonderful book. Go read that book, State of Fear by Michael Crichton. After 5 billion years, he wrote, our planet remains amazingly active. We have 500 volcanoes and an eruption every 2 weeks. Earthquakes are continuous, 1.5 million a year. A moderate Richter 5 quake every 6 hours. A big earthquake every 10 days. Tsunamis race across the Pacific Ocean every 3 months. Our atmosphere is as violent as the land beneath it. At any moment, he writes, there are 1,500 electrical storms across the planet. 11 lightning bolts strike the ground each second. A tornado tears across the surface of every year or every 6 hours, which is pretty remarkable. And every 4 days, he wrote, a giant cyclonic storm, hundreds of miles in diameter, spins over the ocean and wreaks havoc on the land. And then he finishes up and basically says, and what does man do? Man can't control it. Man runs from the storms.
Yeah. And all we could do is try our best to live in this brutal world. And if you look at statistics of climate deaths, the numbers are astronomical. How, just 100 years ago, thousands of people died each year from climate-related deaths. We've reduced that number by 99% because we have satellite technology and radar technology. And we have materials that allow us to fortify our homes and withstand hurricanes and tornadoes and storms. And so despite all of that you just read, which is pretty daunting and very scary, you'd almost think, I don't want to be on this planet. Despite all of that, humans are thriving tremendously, and we're producing more food than ever before, right? We're able to live in this extreme heat and the extreme cold because of air conditioning and because of heat and because of our clothing and goggles. And so these are all fossil fuel products that say, like, we're able to survive this environment. And I think that's something to celebrate. It's tragic that young people don't look at fossil fuels the way you and I do. They've been conditioned to say, like, this is all bad. Oil is bad. Coal is bad. Like, these are amazing products that were found on the earth that God gave us, that brilliant minds turned into products that have saved lives and made us prosperous and healthy and hygienic. I mean, medieval kings would love the condition of the poorest American. And so, it's amazing what it has done to give us this abundance of life. And that's why I fight for this industry, no doubt.
You talk about dignity, human dignity, and I want to get into that in just a second. Don't let me forget, but I wanted to play this George Carlin soundbite, one of his hilarious bits, and sort of putting in perspective the way man has a relationship to the earth and to the natural resources of this world. He's been dead 16 years. He got it. He saw the scam. He saw the grift all those years ago.
Do you ever think about the arithmetic? Planet has been here 4.5 billion years. We've been here, 100,000? Maybe 200,000? And we've only been engaged in heavy industry for a little over 200 years. 200 years versus 4.5 billion. And we have the conceit to think that somehow we're a threat? That somehow we're going to put in jeopardy this beautiful little blue-green ball that's just a-floating around the sun? The planet has been through a lot worse than us. Been through all kinds of things worse than us. Been through earthquakes, volcanoes, plate tectonics, continental drift, solar flares, sunspots, magnetic storms, the magnetic reversal of the poles, hundreds of thousands of years of bombardment by comets and asteroids and meteors, worldwide floods, tidal waves, worldwide fires, erosion, cosmic rays, recurring ice ages, and we think some plastic bags, some aluminum cans are going to make a difference?
So true.
Yeah.
So true. So
And
what,
if
talk
it's like,
about human. That's a great bit. I mean, I loved the way he was always able to put things in perspective. And sometimes people didn't like it, but
yeah,
there you are. You had to respect it. Yeah.
that was
So talk about
wonderful.
human
Yeah.
dignity. What, I mean, first of all, what about the fact that we have derived so many benefits from the ability to use power and energy. Energy is productivity, for example. The other thing is, why is it that in turn we want to deprive the third world from using what we already know works real well?
Yeah, exactly. It's a great point. It's the reason why so many people, legally and illegally, are trying to get into America. Right? They see our quality of life, and they want it. And I can't blame them for wanting the quality of life of the West, America, Western Europe, Australia, etc., developed nations, because it is prosperous and hygienic and bountiful and plentiful. There's such a dignity that comes from the millions of fossil fuel products. I mean, way too many to enumerate. Contact lenses, these little earbuds, so many things that are made from plastic and natural gas. And we talk a lot about this going green, right? And Joe Biden or less intelligent, dumb people, let's just be honest, dumb people will say, we're going to get rid of oil and gas. We're going to get rid of fossil fuels if we go green. You say, well, those products are made from oil and gas, right? So you're not going to really get rid of oil and gas. You're just going to turn them into another product. But even outside of that, they only make electricity poorly, expensively, wind and solar, right? They don't really do anything but make electricity, and they barely do that. But there are these millions of products, like your glasses and like your plastic cup I've been having some sips of water from, and medicine and detergent. And think of COVID. Think of all of the Purells and the wipes. If anyone who has had a kid, your diapers and Tylenol, right? The millions of products that have made our life better, that have given humans dignity, right? Because there's nothing dignified in rancid food. There's nothing dignified in being victim of the elements, whether it's the heat or the cold. There's nothing dignified in being dirty, right? There's nothing dignified in having chronic pain. And so fossil fuels have given the human condition an amazing amount of dignity. Whereas before, only the richest people on earth could afford either medicine or whatever elixir numbed the pain. Everyone else just suffered, right? Only the rich were bountiful and well fed. But now pretty much everybody can. So much so that what's the biggest problem facing our poor? Obesity. I mean, that's remarkable. Like, our poor's biggest health problem is that they eat too much and they have obesity issues. Not saying it's a good thing, but saying it's a reflection of this abundance of life that fossil fuels have given us and this dignity. And my question when I testify before Congress, I ask this: if we get rid of oil and gas, how are we going to make contact lenses, and how are we going to make Tylenol? And if the answer is, all right, we'll make just enough oil and gas and coal for these little few products, but then those products will be so expensive that, again, only the rich can have them, right? And right now, you and I can, as much as John Kerry hates us and looks down upon us, or people like Michael Bloomberg, who leads the charge to put coal miners out of a job, right? $2 billion he's given to shut down coal mines nationwide. Reprehensible little man. One of the most loathsome people on earth, Michael Bloomberg. Michael Bloomberg hates me. I probably feel very similar to Michael, although I try not to hate. Michael Bloomberg has a much better quality of life than I do, right? In that he's worth $60 billion. He has homes around the world. He's got fleets of private jets. But you know what? If Michael Bloomberg went to Paris and you and I went to Paris, right, maybe he took a private jet and we flew in like row 45D, right? Maybe he's staying at the Ritz and we're staying at like a little, dumpy hotel. But if our selfie in front of the Eiffel Tower is the same, right? Like, the Eiffel Tower is the same for both of us. The Mona Lisa, the Louvre, right? What Michael Bloomberg experiences around the world, that piece of bread, that croissant, that's the same for us. And fossil fuels have equalized humanity. He may have greater privilege, but pretty much my cell phone is the same as Michael Bloomberg's cell phone. And his TV, he may have 3,000 of them, but I have the same TV and I can access the same information. And I think that level of equality that fossil fuels has given us, that level of dignity, that we're kind of on the same plateau, even though he's worth $60 billion and I'm worth $6 billion, that level of equality, I think people like Michael Bloomberg and John Kerry, ultimately in their core of cores, I think they hate that. I don't think they want us to be equal because they don't see themselves. And that is why they will say, learn to code, find something else to do. We're going to shut down that coal mine and they'll find a new green job. The disdain with which they talk to rural America, the disdain in which they'll tell loggers 40 years ago, we're shutting you down because they don't want equality. They don't want the equal dignity of humanity. And that's why their ideology has to be defeated.
They talk about egalitarianism as if it's a goal, but it sounds to me like you believe you're saying explicitly, they don't believe in it.
No, not at all. They don't. Oh. No. And they show it through their actions. And that's why, again, why I had to start this organization, because I got tired of people saying, hey, look, Michael Bloomberg, he just cares about climate change. BS. He does not. He does not. This is not about the climate, because again, what I just said. Exactly. It's if you care about climate change, then if I tell you use more fossil fuels to make an EV than if you just had a regular combustion engine car. So why do you want us to drive EVs? For a climate change. Yeah. But here are the numbers. So we should drive the combustion engine if the goal is to use fewer fossil fuels. Nope. Drive the EV. Why? The answer, they want to control how we drive. It's not about the climate. They want to control how we eat. They want to control how we drive. They want to control the thermostat in our home. Remember Barack Obama, we can't just sit around with our temperatures, our thermostat at 70 degrees anymore. Right.
That's what they want to
control every aspect of your life, and the climate is the guise under which they tend to do it. So that is why we have to fight them at their level.
Joe Biden is Barack Obama 3.0 in terms of fulfilling the Obama package of items, priorities list that he had, but he's on steroids and he's even worse. And it's even worse because he's not actually in control of his own agenda. He's got people to do that. Let's go to real quick, because there's an implicit thing that has been yet unspoken here in this conversation about what it is that we're supposed to be afraid of. And of course, it's always been CO2. That's been the latest. Of course, they've come through with myriad different excuses since the 1970s when the Earth Day started, and all these excuses about what things that we have to avoid or things that are bad for us, or we're going to die because it's going to be an ice age, et cetera, et cetera. Here's Dr. Patrick Moore talking about CO2. He is the man who co-founded Greenpeace, of all people. And listen to this.
One of my missions is to turn on its head the idea that carbon dioxide is a pollutant and somehow dangerous, when in fact it is the most important nutrient for all life on Earth, and without it this would be a dead planet. So I say not only is carbon dioxide good, it is essential. And it's a good thing that we are putting some more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, because it was running low before we came along. If we had definitive proof that CO2 was causing serious problems and we could prove it, don't you think they would write that down on a piece of paper somewhere so people could read it? They don't have definitive proof, period, in science. I'm a student of the philosophy and history of science, and I know that the scientific method has not been applied in such a way as to prove that carbon dioxide is causing the Earth to warm.
Do you think in a few years, say 50 years from now, people go, that was a really stupid period in our history when we tried to change all our energy policies to cut this gas?
I am firmly of the belief that the future will show that this whole hysteria over climate change was a complete fabrication.
Boom.
Yeah, very well said. And what he mentioned about how it was carbon dioxide, this goes back to the recent Supreme Court decision of Chevron deference, which was breaking and was a huge win for the industry as well as for sanity. The reason why is because you get these huge pieces of legislation from Congress where they say we need to clean up the air. Well, what is a pollutant? How many of those pollutants are allowed in? How many parts per million? And so the fact that CO2 is now considered a pollutant, it used to be methane. methane became greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases became CO2. And now we suddenly have these bureaucrats saying, well, you're not allowed to do that. It releases too much CO2. And finally, enough people, brought this lawsuit to say, if CO2 is bad, then it is up to the Congress to say, here's how much CO2 you're allowed to emit. It is not up to some faceless, nameless bureaucrat weaponizing government in the Biden administration to suddenly declare CO2 is bad. And it's very important that the scientist made this point. Since when did CO2 become poisonous? Right? It hasn't. It's been weaponized by a bunch of idiot bureaucrats who have government power. So it's a really important point that guy was making.
Well, and here's another one, and of course, something you've known for years and years and years, where, of course, the government only funds things with which it agrees. These bureaucrats that maybe have a lesser voice after the Chevron doctrine case, or Chevron doctrine was tossed out by the U.S. Supreme Court. We can only hope. Here's how the scam works.
You have to have a different sense of time than just going back to 1850. And that's what these people are doing. They're saying that beginning in 1850, we started using fossil fuels, and now there's a climate crisis because of that. It's complete balderdash. There's nothing to it. It is a hollow husk of an idea, and it is being perpetrated by politicians who want a scare story to get the vote. And so 80% of all science research in the United States is in universities. In these universities, you cannot get a grant about climate unless you are on the scare story side. It just won't happen. No, not only that, you will be ostracized by your peers and sent out with a pitchfork in your rear end if you do such a thing as to counter the narrative, as they like to call it. So we're stuck in this situation where all this negative information and scare stories are being fed to the politicians so they can use them to make fear in the public, to control the public. And that's what this is. It's just like, in a way, like COVID, it's a totally different situation, but they did everything they could to make us afraid during COVID instead of giving us hope. And they denigrated us and our children, and they broke the golden rule of medicine, which is do no harm, and that everybody has a right to informed consent before having medical treatment of any kind, whether it's a needle or a drug or a surgery. You have a right to refuse that under the law of medicine. But they've just thrown that out the window altogether, in the same way as they've thrown out rational thought about climate out the window, and are saying now that they have a crystal ball, which is obviously a mythical object and doesn't actually exist.
Dr. Patrick
point.
Moore again.
Yeah, I love that point. I wrote an op-ed a couple of years ago called COVID Envy. I think it's in the American Spectator, where I talk about how the environmental left has always had set an agenda. They haven't been successful in enacting it, but they looked at COVID and they were surely envious that they were able to do this so powerfully and so quickly. And the parallels are remarkable, right? Fake science that's funded by ideological organizations. If you question the science, you have to be ostracized, you have to be deplatformed, you have to be called that you're an absolute threat. So there's no questioning the science whatsoever. The elite are allowed to exempt themselves, right? Just like John Kerry is allowed to have his private jet. Gavin Newsom was allowed to go to the French Laundry. And if you say, well, what about the science? It's like, well, look, my position is such that I don't have to
I'm
follow
so important.
those rules. Exactly. I am so important. Fear is the most important thing, right? There's no rational conversation. And again, love the name of this podcast, right? There is no walk me through CO2 levels. It is, if we don't do this now, we are going to die. You get the hyperbolic AOC who says, 10 years ago, she said, we have 6 years left or 6 years ago, she said, we have 10 years left to live if we don't do something on climate change, right? This absolute hyperbolic level of insanity, fear, saying what, logical things go out the window. Same analogies. How many times did we stand in a jet bridge and you were told you had to stand 6 feet apart, but as soon as you got on the plane, you stood shoulder to shoulder, and you said, well, I was just like sitting next to this guy for the last 4 hours, and now you try to get off the plane, and they're like, sure, don't stand up, COVID rules, and you're like, but I was just sitting next to him, right? the same insanity of what I just said about EVs, right? If you care about not burning oil, well, you burn more oil to make an EV. Don't you ask those questions? We have a crisis, damn it. And you say, well, where's the logic? So the parallels between COVID and climate are fascinating. Why I wrote this op-ed, and I'm glad he's talking about it as well. It's the same insanity because it's the same agenda.
Well, and then I've heard you talk about it's a control agenda by the commies. And well, John Kerry isn't a commie, but it doesn't matter if he is or isn't. He's actually espousing things that are from the Marxists that he surrounded himself by. And I'm sorry to hear that for him, but that's it. You talk about, this is something that really alarms me, and it's the COVID emergency that you see around the corner. Could you talk about that?
I was convinced that Joe Biden's key weapon to winning re-election is the declaration of a climate emergency, because as we saw in COVID, when the president declares an emergency, you can't go to church on Sunday, right? Like, that's in the Constitution. We saw it, right? If the president says, I declare an emergency, therefore, certain businesses have to close. The ones who have lots of lobbyists in DC are allowed to stay open, right? So CVS and Best Buy.
Looking at you, Walmart.
Yeah, they can stay open, but like Victoria's hardware store, no, you have to close. And of course, the most important part of an emergency, as we saw in COVID, is that you have to drop ballot boxes in the Philadelphia suburbs starting in August. And that was basically how 2020 came about. And I know I sound like a denier when I say that in the J6.
No, you're not. Not here, you're
going to come after us. Well, they're still going to come after us. But that's the same principle. And so what's the next crisis? Well, it has to be a climate crisis. And so if you declare a climate crisis, the government could easily have said, you know what, we can't ask people to all drive on election day. It's too risky. We're going to disperse ballot boxes throughout the neighborhood, and that way people walk, and that we use less electricity, we use fewer fossil fuels, right? Weird little protocols that would have been put in place that would have helped the Biden administration with the ballot effort necessary to ensure re-election. It's exactly what they did in COVID. And I thought, and I still do think, they have to find something to get those ballot boxes. You don't suddenly pick up 600,000 votes in Pennsylvania in a couple of hours without some weird ballot box shenanigans happening. And if you question that, people say, how dare you? Our democracy is at risk. But a lot of people know there were some ballot box shenanigans because of COVID. They need to do it again. And climate, I thought, is the best way to make it happen.
I've heard it explained, where you have all you need are votes, right? You don't actually need bodies, because bodies aren't required anymore. You don't have to present yourself to a voting office or county elections office to cast a ballot anymore, or to your neighbor who's sitting at the local school who's taken down your name. So handing you a ballot to send it over. Nobody cares anymore, right? I do, of course you do. But so they've removed that. And so if they have just ballots that, let's say, I don't know, are made out for people who used to live in a place or have moved off, but, because they don't update the voter rolls, we don't really know who's really still living here because we don't update them for every 5 years. And, sure, I got all these people registered to vote. Sure, they're illegal aliens that just came in on Biden's airplanes from the third world, but why not? We've got those ballots that are now being sent somewhere.
Absolutely. And this is not an insurmountable problem, right? I mean, elections are, I'm sure they are complex, but they are not complicated. Jeff Bezos can track probably 3 billion packages and within a few seconds. He knows exactly where they are, exactly who ordered them. It is possible to keep track of our voting systems. There's a deliberate effort to not have it be clear, to not have it be forthcoming, because people take advantage of it. And your only desire, heck, look at the SAFE Act that can't pass in the Senate. I saw Mike Johnson say he was going to tie the next spending bill to it, and I think that's great. It shouldn't have taken this long. What's the goal of?
I see it.
Yeah. What's the goal of? Well, I hope so. What's the goal of the Senate, though, saying no, we don't want to? What's the goal of every single Democrat -5 saying we're not going to pass this in the House? Why don't you want
illegal aliens to vote? What was that again?
Because they want to cheat. And I do hope when there is a new Trump administration I do hope there is federal legislation. I believe deeply in states' rights and in the 10th Amendment. But when it comes to the election of the president, if Wisconsin is going to pull some shenanigans, that affects the rest of us. And now there's almost an interstate commerce clause invocation, right? Wisconsin can't have some nonsense happen that I, as a Virginian, now have to suffer the consequences because you're all a bunch of cheaters, or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania. So I hope there is federal legislation to say the states have to get their act together, because I'm tired of the theft of elections. I really am. And it's happened for years now.
I mean, and you can't prove it, because all they do is say, well, you don't have proof because the mail-in ballot envelope has been separated from the ballot. There's no way to go back and check that. But, you talk about this, how one state can hijack an entire election. And it is similar in the field of energy, in which we have the state of California, which until recently had control over what Virginia did with respect to car emissions and other energy issues. But they've got a cartel with a lot of different states. How did it come to pass that other states tied their wagons to Gavin Newsom and all the other crackpots who've run California's car?
Yeah.
How'd that?
Pretty remarkable. And I'll give Gavin Newsom a lot of credit. Like, talk about leadership. You got 16 or so states to pass laws to say what I do in California, you have to do that's
outrageous.
Powerful.
That's unconstitutional, by the way. That's whatever, without representation. I mean, that's just absurd.
Yeah, and you would think as a state, I would say, I don't care what California does. I mean, California can do what California wants, and I would choose not to live in California, just like I chose not to live in New York. So it's remarkable that he had that level of pull and sway. But yeah, Virginia just untethered itself under our current governor, Glenn Youngkin, untethered itself from California's climate rules. Hopefully more states will. Again, California can do I feel bad for the people of California. A lot of them are trapped, just like, those 4 folks I was talking about in coal mines in West Virginia. This is your biggest asset, your family house. You can't mortgage it because no one wants to buy it. You can't afford to move. Your job is in this town. You're kind of stuck. And I feel bad for the people who are stuck. But if you're not stuck, like millions of people are not, you got to vote with your feet, and you got to get the hell out of those states, because I can no longer give my tax dollars. Heck, I want to change what county I'm in Virginia, because I don't like my county leadership. The idea of moving is pretty daunting. But I don't want to give my tax dollars to people who despise me. And we elect people who despise us.
Then you put them in control of all of these things. We were talking about the Pacific Northwest and the whole West, the timber industry in the thrall of federal authority. And you've got millions of board feet of timber that go up in flames that nobody's able to sell. Can't sell them because you can't log them, and they go up in flames every year. And indeed, so it is with a lot of at least in the West, they've got the water rationing that to farmers. In the state of California, millions of acre feet of water go into the Pacific Ocean that they could have given to farmers to grow food, but it's going to waste to get rid of a snail darter.
And I'm not an anarchist, right? I have great distrust of government, as our founders did, but I do understand there is a role for government. And these 2 issues that you talked about,
getting our way.
Yeah. Well, these 2 issues that you talked about, forest management, infrastructure projects like water storage and reservoirs, those are, currently speaking, those are roles of government, and they do it so poorly. And yet government wants more power, right? They want more. They want to tell you how much food you should eat. They want to tell you. Mayor Adams in New York City, where I was born and raised, wants regulation on how much you consume because of the carbon footprint of food, et cetera. Your job is to keep us safe, and crime in New York City.
That's right.
Your job is to run the subway, and the subway is so poorly run that people don't even take it anymore. Your job as the governor is to manage the forests of California. No one runs for governor of California because they want to manage forests. They run for governor because they want to talk about trans activism and the National Guard. They want to run for governor on sex. Exactly. But your core basic role, our government does them so poorly. And yet government wants more power to take on more responsibility. If we could just have government focus on what it does, manage forests, manage water infrastructure projects so that when California had 2 of its wettest seasons in decades, those hundreds of billions of gallons of water would have been preserved. Instead, nope, right out to the Pacific.
He has one job. That guy has one job, and that's to keep his people safe. And the fundamental one thing that keeps people safe is water. Water. You can't keep people alive without water. And what does he do? Sticks his thumb up his big old derriere and does nothing about any reservoirs because he knows what we all know. It would be a decades-long effort to get through the environmental hurdles to get another reservoir to save water, to save lives. Because that brings us to another point. It's not about people, is it?
No. It's almost like we're in their way. And that's again, why we have to fight these folks like Michael Bloomberg and Tom Steyer and John Kerry. They have this agenda that they want to push. And I have an agenda I want to push. The difference is that people get in the way of their agenda and they want those people gone, whether they work on Keystone Pipeline, whether they work in coal or what. They just want them out because this is what I want to do. People be damned. I think our agenda is we want people to prosper. And we know we need timber and we need oil and coal and gas and we need manufacturing jobs. I want to see an agenda where people can find those jobs and they stay in America and they're able to provide a quality of life for their residents. And the other side is like, nope, we're going to eliminate those jobs because I have this agenda that conforms to the Paris Climate Accords. And the World Economic Forum is telling us that if we don't reduce our emissions by 0.X% by this year, and we all met in Davos, right? And they all stand up and they sit on their panel, and these are the people who push their agenda. And
those
Joe
are the people
Bob
rationing
Coal-Miner,
resources.
Exactly.
Those are the people rationing resources. Those are the people, well, they can have some, but you can't. Get those people the hell out of my life.
Yeah. And especially as we saw in COVID, if they don't voluntarily live the prescriptions they're making us live, whether it's Nancy Pelosi getting her hair done or right, if you have power and you're using your coercive power for whatever cause, if other people have to obey your authority, but you voluntarily do not do it yourself because you can exempt yourself, you are just, in the simplest terms, you're a tyrant. And if you say you're not allowed to leave your house this Thanksgiving, Deborah Birx. And then when she went to her Thanksgiving gathering, they were like, well, Dr. Birx. And she said, I haven't seen my family all year. Barack Obama, Martha's Vineyard has a rule, no parties allowed. Barack Obama had his 60th. What did they say? It was a very sophisticated crowd. Oh, well,
BLM. You can riot. That gets you outside and you can riot and that makes you feel better. And when you feel better, then, oh, by the way, you can go out and riot. But hey, you stand-up paddleboarder guy, yeah, I'm sorry, you're going to get arrested on the open ocean.
And if you use your power to force people to live and behave and act a certain way, but you don't have to do that, that now we are in a level of statism that is tyrannical, and those people have to be overthrown. Those people have to be removed from power because they are a threat to you, your property, your liberty, your family, your livelihood. And people like John Kerry are, when he takes a private jet and says, well, as the exact quote, for someone like me, it's the only choice. Holy cow.
Oh my gosh.
He doesn't want you to eat meat, but he wants a private jet because I'm John Kerry. These people are dangerous.
I'm John Kerry.
They need to be, their ideology needs to be defeated. These people are a threat to you and your property, and that's why I fight them every day. And I know you do too.
Well, one of the other things before we wrap up, and it's I just thought you'd get a kick out of this. The rumors is a rumor that one of the worst environmental actors in the country, in a state house, a Governor Jay Inslee of the state of Washington. And you can be forgiven if you don't know who he is, because nobody knows who he is. He's just some dumb guy who's, he made it. It's his third term as governor of the state of Washington. And he's truly one of the least talented individuals in a state house in the country. But nevertheless, he's beguiled somebody. Now he's going to leave, and he's hoping that his attorney general will pick up where he left off. And where do you suppose he's going to go? Do you have any idea where the guy who won't let you or wants you to not use wood to heat your homes, who doesn't like any kind of natural gas to heat your home, where do you suppose a guy like that's going to go? High taxes and all that stuff. He's going to go to possibly, rumor has it, the state of Idaho, the free state of Idaho for his retirement.
He's not even staying in his own state that he led for 12 years.
I mean,
Isn't that remarkable?
even bad leaders want to get out of states that have bad leadership.
Yeah.
Well, here you are. You're a guy who lives in the exurbs and rural, actually, technically rural Virginia, where you are a sheep farmer. And here you are. I've got a video of you, or at least your sheep.
Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah. Here it comes.
Oh, gosh. Those guys got out.
Are you supposed to be on this side of the fence? I don't think so.
That's my favorite time of year is lambing season is hysterical. There's a maybe 3-week window that they're 5 weeks to 8 or 9 weeks where they're still very small and they're very bouncy and they're starting to get curious and explore it. When they're first born, they don't leave mom's side. But they hit the stages that in that video where they just become the most fun, like it's puppies, and there are lots of them. So it's just it's a really, really great time on the farm.
Well, I just spent some time in Ireland where I saw the sheepdog herders, these sheepdogs doing the herding, and I just thought maybe you'd. This is not my video. I just found this one. Perhaps you could get yourself a dog to round those things up. Let's just check it out.
Isn't that good?
That's pretty cute. All they do is look at him.
That's a good dog. That's a good dog he knows his role. That was fantastic.
Yeah, I know. He just side-eyed him. Well, actually, but how do you collect all your? I mean, how do you shepherd your sheep? How do you?
So we do have
gather
dogs.
Your flock?
Have one dog, Murray, who does a very good job to help move them. Most important thing is really good fences. And so that video that you showed of my little lambs on the driveway, they're just small enough to go under the bottom fence. And so there's a week period that they're a little tricky because they like to escape. But good fences, as Frost said, they make good neighbors and they also make good shepherds. So fencing is key.
Checking the fences every stinking day. What do you like about doing that? How did you get into it?
Married
How does a New York City kid get into sheep herding and stuff and farming?
To the first part of your question, what do I like about it is there's a productivity of doing something. I think especially guys right now, just not that there's a difference between men and women, right? I think guys right now in America, men are suffering from a lack of activity, right? For a lot of guys in DC, the most manly thing they do is they leave like a nasty Yelp review. Yeah, they take little e-scooters to their desk. Maybe they go to the gym, but we've got 70,000 years of DNA in us that wants to do something. And we're getting further away from building fires, chopping wood, making things. What I like about it is there's a return to kind of human nature of working on the farm and of protecting livestock and of doing something of value. And again, I was born and raised in the city, and I'm not knocking urbanites, I get it. But if you don't have that sense of purpose, sometimes it manifests itself in a lot of anger and a lot of frustration and a lot of depression. It's why there are always urban riots, right? Rural folks don't riot very often because
they're too tired.
Exactly. So I think that's the most important thing. It's when I'm done with my phone and work, and obviously work follows me everywhere and I travel a lot, but when I'm on the farm, home, just not paying attention, there's a level of calm on understanding creation that it's amazing to participate in. That's very beautiful, and I wouldn't give that up for anything.
I think there's an awakening in the younger generation in which they would like to know the derivation of their food and what sort of processes it's been gone through, and is it okay? I mean, I know we were talking about plastics, and you extol the virtues of plastics and that sort of thing because it is an egalitarian, it's an equality kind of a situation, makes things less expensive for the masses, and that's fine. But I think people want to know if they got plastic in their food, stuff like that. And then you got the feds on the other hand. You got the feds coming in and shutting down Amish farmers and people who sell raw milk, and where's the balance?
Raw milk, the scariest stuff in the world, raw milk. When I mentioned how the organization was founded, because there's this disconnect between the people who make policy and those who actually live the policy, and I was talking about energy. If I didn't do energy, I think I would definitely love to talk about ag and farming issues. And a perfect example of this disconnect, and I don't choose her because she's an easy punching bag, but it's Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. And she's an easy punching bag a lot of times because it's her own fault. But years ago, as she was coming on the scene and becoming a personality, she was at an urban farm in her district. And you can see this online. You can see this online. And she talks about how, even this is a heavily Hispanic neighborhood. She looked at what people are growing, and she doesn't see anyone growing yucca. And she wondered if it was because of colonialism, because of a deep sense of racism towards Latino people. And you wanted to say the reason why they're not growing yucca is because it's the Bronx, right? They're not growing coconuts either, right? And the cotton fields were not found in Boston. They were found in Mississippi. And you say, how can you have that level of disconnect with nature and with common sense even, that you think they're not growing yucca in the Bronx for racism? They don't grow avocado either, that's a huge problem because she makes ag policy, right? She makes policy that farmers have to obey. And here is a person who doesn't and that's the problem with our legislators these days. They do not have a connection with the issues that they legislate and regulate. And that disconnect is going to cause poverty, anger, violence, right? George III had no connection with his colonists, but he said, stamp tax, quartering tax. And we're hitting that level of lack of representation because our representatives don't know where our food comes from, where our energy comes from. They don't understand who's fighting our wars, right? They'll send them off to die in Ukraine, but there is no connection anymore. And that's a problem. It's a huge problem our country's facing.
Mm-hmm. So if you are advising the next president of the United States on energy affairs, what things would you say to that individual to do if they would do what you wanted them to do?
Yeah, reversing everything Biden has done is the most important step. Actually hiring folks from the industry who understand the industry, the way it works, would be the most important step. If you go back to pre-COVID, but peak energy production in America, so this is late 18, early mid 2019. Energy is exploding. We're finally a net exporter of oil, first time in a long time.
First time in 70 years.
Yeah. Look at what happened, right? Like energy prices were low. Oil was around $48, $50 a barrel. We brought in record amount of revenue for the Treasury. We had more people working in this industry than ever before. When you have freedom and you allow freedom to thrive, free markets, but free people, free industry, Trump gave them an environment of freedom. We lowered emissions more than any other European country. They didn't pollute. They didn't collude. They didn't price gouge, right? Prices came down. More gas was affordable to more people at the lowest price point than before. Because that's what freedom does, right? Freedom, and all of this accusation of the greedy oil companies are raising prices. Boy, they didn't raise prices when Trump was president. Why is that? Right? So that would be my advice. Allow people to be free. Allow the industry to be free, because you'll notice when it's free, it does more good for more people at a lower price point in the most healthy and sustainable and environmentally conscientious way than ever before. And that is the beauty It's what Adam Smith called the invisible and, right? That is the beauty of freedom and free people and free markets. And that will happen with ag. That will happen with cars. That will happen with all industry. Biden does not believe in freedom. At his core, he is a statist. Of course, he's a statist. He's been in government since the 70s. He believes in government. And I don't. I believe in freedom. And so if you want to have a robust energy industry, just let it work. Let it operate. Regulate it, sure. Make sure there aren't abuses. Absolutely. Test water levels and pH, of course. But let them do their damn job, because they will do more good for this country than the government ever can.
How can people get in touch with you, Daniel Turner of Power of the Future?
Our website is powerofthefuture.com. Email me, daniel@powerofthefuture.com, if you have a question or you want to talk more, or some solar farm is coming into your small town in Kansas, guaranteeing to make everybody rich, and you don't know if you want to lease your land to them, or any question, daniel@powerofthefuture.com, and I'm on all the platforms. Twitter is still my favorite.
Yeah, me too.
I enjoy it. I enjoy the banter. I hope people realize I'm laughing when I tweet. Sometimes I think people think I'm angry, and I'm not. I'm actually laughing. I'm a happy person, right? The left is angry. The right, we're concerned, but for the most part, people on the right are pretty happy people. This was a happy conversation, so we're happy people, and we like to laugh.
Well, we'll come back and reconnoiter, and what we'll do is we'll talk about the power grid and AI's impact on that. Because I think that's a pretty big sore point. So we need to talk about that. I meant to get into it today, but I think this is fine for just now. And really appreciate you coming on.
It was a great time. Thank you so much, Victoria. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. To keep the programs you like to listen to, please rate this podcast with a fantastic 5 stars on your Apple Podcast app every time you listen, and give me a great review. Plus, of course, subscribe to the podcast. It makes a difference with the big tech algorithm and the big tech oligarchs, and it makes us easier to find. Please get in touch with me on all the big tech stuff. Yeah, we're still there. Using the names Victoria Taft or the Adult in the Room podcast on MeWe, Parler, Minds, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks to 1ACast for imaging, editing, and production. The fantastic song is Gospel by the March 4th Band of Portland, Oregon. Music for Antifa versus Mike Strickland is Ride or Die by Raps by RC. The Adult in the Room podcast is also a production of Flamingo Road Studios. Remember, head up, heart out, and strive to be the adult in the room. Till next time, mischief managed.